Hey, and what is up, movie viewers? Dena Moviews and Reviews here, asking, what you watching? Well, today I am watching The Silent Twins, starring Letitia Wright, Tamara Lawrence, Amara J. St. Aubin, Trevor Etienne, and Jodie May. Directed by Agnieszka Mosinska. Writing credits: Andrea Siegel did the screenplay, Marjorie Wallace. It is based on a book that she wrote. It is produced by Katie Anderson, Sebastian Barker, Jake Carter, and a host of other producers. Now, the Silent Twins movie chronicles the life of June and Jennifer Gibbons. The film was adapted from Marjorie Wallace's book called The Silent Twins, and it is set to follow June and Jennifer from childhood into adulthood. June and Jennifer Gibbons were black twins that retreated from speaking to society and amalgamated into each other to what is referred to as an extreme level. It is common for twins to comfort one another and develop their own way of communicating. But this one was said to be to the extreme. So let's sum this up a bit. Black twin girls born in the 1960s from Barbados, born to West Indian parents. Their father, whose name was Aubrey, was a part of the Royal Society of England, and this required that he move constantly. Now, these two little black girls in a town where their family were the only black family there attended an all-white school where they were the only black students, exposed and suffered a lot of abuse from Caucasians that they were around. I read where a teacher stated that she would have to let them out early before school actually let out because the other children were so cruel to them and they treated them so badly that she thought she was doing trying to protect them by releasing them, allowing them to get a head start. And I'm sure that this abuse further reinforced the twins' belief that they should not be talking to anyone. And that included their teachers and colleagues. They even refused to write and read. And they said it was a challenge to the teacher. It should have been a challenge to the teacher. And I can say without a doubt that this undoubtedly contributed to and caused them to have trauma and could have played a large role in their personal behavior. Now, these two little black girls referred to as the Silent Twins because they spoke only to one another. This occurred from their childhood to adulthood. This movie opens with a motion animation that is meant to be metaphorical. And for some, this is considered to be creative, but to me, the way it was presented in the movie, it came across creepy. And its implementation in turn made the twins appear creepy and a bit sinister. And you get the impression it is just two bizarre little girls exhibiting weird behavior. That is until you dig a little deeper into the reality of this movie, which I will delve into just a little bit later in this commentary. Now, these two girls would speak and communicate with one another, only with one another. Even that they wouldn't even speak with their parents or their siblings. Whenever someone was around, they would put their heads down and say nothing and not even respond no matter what was done to them. Now, the mother in this movie would stand outside their bedroom door and listen to them as they speak with one another. They would talk to one another. She would simply bring them food, mail, or whatever they needed and leave them be. She would just shut the door. That, for me, was strikingly odd. Jennifer was clearly the dominant of the two, and even when June clearly wanted to speak, she would convince her not to with a look or by putting her finger to her lips, indicating not to speak. And I could not help but wonder if the parents themselves could have done more to interact with these little girls early on. These two girls would not even speak to their own families in their own house. This led to their parents being approached by school officials to have them examined by psychologists who determined that they use eye contact to communicate with one another, And there was a speech psychologist who concluded that the twins used a mixture of English, Balkan spoken at a very fast pace, and that the twins themselves only understood it. Now, in an attempt to make them independent or try to make them more independent, another doctor felt it would be best if they were separated and sent to separate boarding schools. But each time they would develop a sickness and would become even more withdrawn until they were back with one another again. When they were back with each other, they would continue their not speaking or interacting with others, only with one another. Even though they were quite close twins, they would still have those fights, and they would have near-death fights, as it was stated, and they would argue with one another. Yet they also exhibited a creative side when they were together, using dolls to create plays and performances for one another. Now, these twins began writing comprehensively in their diaries, and they took a liking to writing and purchased them a typewriter in order to try and write novels. They even took some classes. Novels that were sexually explicit, novels about criminal behavior, tragic and disturbing behavior, which makes you wonder what exactly had these children been exposed to, especially given their absence of social interaction. Their stories took place in America, in Malibu, yet they had never even visited America. And it centered around young white people who committed grisly crimes. Having written at least a dozen novels, one in particular was called The Pepsi Cola Addict, and it was about a young teenager who was seduced by his high school teacher. It actually made it into print, but at the age of 18 or around 18, the twins decided they wanted to experience the world. And they did so, but they did it by burglarizing the home of a Caucasian guy that they liked. This low-life guy, but he introduced them to drugs and alcohol, and they both would eventually engage in sex with this same guy. The girls would be out all hours of the night and noticeably had no problem speaking when they were around these white guys. They were doing drugs in this movie, and eventually they were charged with burglary as well, and they were incarcerated for arson. I think they just wanted to be seen, and they were acting out. They wanted to be seen and heard. They wanted attention because they called the police on themselves and was confused, and I think they was mistaken on how to go about getting the attention that they both seemed to have wanted. Now, they were, because of this arson, put into a maximum security hospital for the criminally insane. Now, in a later interview with the New Yorker, June described that 12-year stay in Broadmoor Asylum as pure hell. Here they were inundated with psychotropic drugs. But I want you to know that this is the same asylum that housed Moore's child killer Ian Brady and Peter Sutcliffe, who was known as the Yorkshire Ripper. Brady and Henley were jailed for life in 1966. They were jailed for life in 1966 for abducting, torturing, sexually abusing, and murdering 5 children. And Henley was the accomplice to Brady. And for 2 years, they were on a reign of terror. And this was in the 1960s. But let me just say, this movie was recommended to me by my daughter. My daughter, of course, just happens to be a mental health therapist. And once I began to watch this movie, it made sense to me why she would find this kind of movie interesting. I myself looked at this movie more from a black mother's point of view, to be exact. And I would say perhaps the average parent's perspective. So what some would view as weird or unusual behavior for me from the twins, in this case early on, would really just set off red flags for me, letting me know that something is out of whack in my children's life as well as my family's life. Or what I'm questioning, what am I exposing my children too that is causing them to behave like this. And as a mother, I would have felt it's my duty to find that and resolve it. At least give it a try by any means necessary. Now, watching this movie, for me, I kind of felt it was all over the place. From the beginning, it gave no real background or foundation to me as to what may have led up to them exhibiting this type of behavior, because there's always a trigger point where you can at least go back and identify when and perhaps what may have contributed to them exemplifying this unusual behavior. It is common for twins and even siblings to make up their own language or have close bonds, but when it is noticeably unusual to their degree, sometimes it is necessary to assess the situation and start to enact a solution, especially before you decide to seek outside professional assistance. That is just me. Now, this movie opened with some of the most spooky looking animation. It really did not help in this case for me. It eventually became clear that it represented the fantasy or was a part of their imaginative play, and eventually it explained some of their novels. Even so, it helped to make this movie for me more disturbing in a sense. And the camera twisting around and around as they lay on the floor smoking and doing drugs, it just made me dizzy. I am sure this is considered artistry to some and even hinges on dramatics, but for me it was a no-no, because it was just giving me vertigo. I felt pure sympathy for these little black children though. I am someone who loves babies or children, and what makes them so enjoyable is just them being natural, being themselves, just the simplicity of being a child. It is beautiful to me. Their innocence, they're completely innocent when they're children, when they're untouched, unbothered, and completely genuine. That is, until a wicked world with wicked people in it and their agendas come along and taints or try to corrupt what is pure, natural, and virtuous. And that is what I believe happened in this case with June and Jennifer when they were young babies. It is like nature when it is undisturbed. It is kind, blameless. It's natural. It is incorrupt, and it is so beautiful. But the problem today, and for many, is that so many people can't simply look and adore and allow these babies to advance naturally. Most see it as an opportunity to take advantage, abuse, and eventually corrupt these natural entities. They don't allow them to progress naturally. So I felt this movie simply jumped into the perplexing behavior that the children exhibited and disregarded and kind of glossed over their experience or their backstory. I kind of felt like this movie just started in the middle, so one would have to already be familiar with or even have advanced knowledge about these two young ladies, about their past, or have been familiar with their case, Jennifer and June Gibbons' story to begin with. Perhaps the movie was set up with that intent, but if so, it left out viewers like me who were not so familiar with the backstory or historical aspect of these little girls' lives and their experiences to even hear the title, The Silent Twins. It kind of makes you think it is about something sinister, a horror story, or something sci-fi. And once you truly understand their story of being institutionalized and ostracized because they were black, first of all, and a bit of being detested because they sought refuge within one another. Being treated itself, it's a bit horrid when you think about some of the things that they experience. And this is why I gave this movie a 1 out of 5, because it did not offer that aspect of the movie clearly. In fact, the movie kind of glossed over a lot of important facts about the two young ladies. The movie shows journalist Marjorie Wallace, who wrote a book about the girls who attempted to kindle a relationship of sorts with the two girls while they were in the mental institution. She attempted to gain their trust, and she researched their diaries and eventually came to the conclusion that the twins wanted fame, that their behavior was an attempt to achieve it. And she wrote that June and Jennifer felt trapped by their unique bond and believed separation was the only solution to the dilemma. I kind of agree with her with that attention thing. But when I actually did a little research on the twin sisters, June and Jennifer, it made more sense to me, their behavior. Although the film showed a Caucasian child spitting, it never really detailed the trauma that these two little black girls were exposed to in those schools, in that town, and they were exposed to all of this at a very, very young age. There is no denying the effects of mental trauma on the human being's psyche. The thought of subjecting these babies, these little children, to constant bullying, hatred because of their skin color, and we cannot even truly rule out sexual abuse or sexual assault or even physical abuse early on in their young lives that may have played a role in their trauma bonding. Sometimes as parents, we want the best for our children and we remove their little bodies and their little feelings from the equation, and it's never until later that we realize that it may or may not have played a role in their outlook or behavior. Although the intentions are always meant for good, we do have to look back and wonder, what if? So they were ridiculed and ostracized in the all-white community in which they lived. From what I read, these little girls were mistreated for simply being black. They were bullied continuously by these Caucasian students. Even the staff in the town that they were in were not kind to them. They were the only black family there. And what about the parents and their interaction with these little girls? They were not portrayed as being really interested in resolving anything. For me, they seemed a little bit nonchalant in this movie. And I can't help but wonder if they would have taken a more hands-on approach with them. Could it have changed this behavior in the two girls? The mother simply shut the door and let them be. Nope, that would not have been my black mother. She would have said from the start, come down those stairs and join the rest of the family. Don't shut any doors in my house. That's my mother, of course. She would have let us talk all the gibberish we wanted, because me and my little sisters had us secret words that we shared, and we even had secret hand signals that we made up. But what was amazing to us is that my mother knew all those hand signals and she knew the secret word. She did not care if we were making up words or talking gibberish. I would see her reading books while we play, and I'd look up as she is quietly reading her book, or looking like she's reading a book. The book is in one hand, but she's observing us. So when it was time to discipline all of us, and my mother had all girls, and we are the two youngest, she would say, no talking. And we would try to talk to one another with these secret hand codes, and she would say real quick, cut that out too. We knew she meant business. But I hesitate to even say bringing in professionals, because our professionals are not able to fully comprehend or even truly understand the dynamic of exposing young black children to a predominantly hostile white society, and truthfully a white supremacist society. I noticed all of the people that these girls looked up to and had pinned to their walls were all white people, Caucasians. There was Princess Diana and others. There was an absence of any black people for them to mimic or look up to. And although many would try to deny it, representation matters. Their fantasies, what they watched on TV, seemed to be all Caucasian centered. Their sister had a newborn baby, and I noticed even her husband was white as well. So the fact that these young ladies were all but isolated, all of a sudden they are teenagers and they're out all times of the night as teenagers and committing petty crimes, just seemed a bit odd. I kept thinking Where were their parents and how were they allowing this? The parents were not portrayed in a positive manner to me, and it is a movie and doesn't necessarily tell us how they were responding in actual life. I do understand that, but it made them seem scared, unaware, odd themselves to a degree. It seems predominantly what they suffered with was self-identity issues. They had a problem with self-identity and exposure at a young age to trauma and abuse. It seemed to be at the root of it all, and that is just my view. Usually exposure to some type of trauma early on in the lives of young people, whether it be from mental abuse, sexual abuse, physical abuse, bullying, snubbing, feeling ostracized, etc., that can really result in certain behavior and may have caused them to use one another as a means of comfort and refuge. It's just a way of dealing with. It's a coping mechanism, looking to each other because they know what each is experiencing and they can comfort one another. So the school officials recommended to the parents that they put them in special education classes to get them to talk. June and Jennifer would simply sit there quietly with their heads down. Of course, the parents would agree. I hesitate to say that their suggested psychological treatment was even beneficial to these girls. It probably caused them more harm than it did to be helpful to them. When it comes to seeking professional mental health, this is a good idea to remember that treatment should not and is not generic for everyone. Although many would have you think that it is, what it is truly is a game of chess. Most are trained on a level that does not allow them to essentially communicate beyond their training. Sometimes assessments require therapists with a personal touch or a focus on a particular racial group, someone who is able to identify with some of their struggles. And you have to be honest about that when you're dealing with therapists. Some therapists are just uninformed, they're unexperienced, and they can't relate with specific groups. And that's why it's difficult for them sometimes to get to the root of many issues because they don't understand. Identifying problems and instituting a reasonable path to resolution can and should involve the entire family. And it has to start with honestly admitting that society as it is designed affects different groups of people differently, and there are biases within society toward certain groups of people. This is just factual. So to simply deny this dynamic is to disqualify a potential mental health official from many cases like this, in my opinion. Children are humans, they're people, and they can feel and internalize pain that is exuded in their behavior. How they see themselves in society and how they feel others may see them can affect their mentality, and it plays a role in their behavior sometimes. And I believe it is at the root of their peculiar behavior in this particular case. It is a hard truth that many would rather deny or ignore, and is why I further question using therapy or psychological facilities without properly trained officials in place. It's a hard reality. Now, I read in this book where these twin people, they were, someone responded and they commented that these little black girls did not stand a chance going before the doctors of the law and of the state in the UK, that they were displayed in public as freaks, unlucky enough to be born black in black despising Britain, unlucky thrice to be working class, and that alone may have made their interesting behavior looked upon as going from bad to even worse and played a role in their harsh sentencing. So there is no denying that oftentimes certain behaviors exemplified in our children, our black children, are looked upon as simply bad. It is looked upon as criminal, or malicious instead of seeing it as being a peculiar behavior that is worth investigating and sometimes using a gentle approach or means of resolving or even determining how to solve or alleviate the cause of such behavior. All solutions do not have to involve punishment when it comes to children, but sometimes they need behavior modification or therapy and reasonable solutions. As much as we would like to think it doesn't matter, race most certainly plays a role in sentencing as well as how mental health is determined or recognized in Black people. Because children are little sponges, they just are. And this is why it is so important to protect their minds and bodies during what I refer to as their sponge years. That toddler, when they're growing and learning, up until that preteen. Not that the other years are not important, but these little sponge years, you're building a foundation for them. And it is important that they develop properly because they're mimicking what they see, they're internalizing what they hear and see and are exposed to it. And while we must protect them and expose them to the best quality, good, and we don't want to hawk them, but we want to allow them to soak up positivity and learn how to handle disappointment and deal with others that make them unhappy. Maybe a clue that something was missing from these girls' personal life was the representation of the relationship with their mother, or the absence of it, and the relationship with the father or the parents in general. As we see today, many understand these sponge years and will try to use them as an opportunity to corrupt the child's mind. They want to try to implant confusion at that point because they understand that this is a gullible time for children. But instead of not acknowledging and gently guiding the pure innocence within children, most people find it a time to taint them. As long as there's no trauma that impacts children's lives severely during their progressive learning stages, they will grow up to be wonderful members of society, and they will be able to face future challenges in their lives and roll with the storms of life. It doesn't mean that they will not face disappointment, argue, or fight. It means that they will understand it is normal and they will deal with it in a reasonable manner without going to the extreme, as we see today with all the shooting and killing around us, as was exemplified also in this particular movie, and as we see today with the violence in this culture. This particular movie, it made it clear to me that something was glossed over. And for me, it was how these two babies were severely bullied and ostracized in their schools by both the children and the teachers. It never fully detailed what it must have felt like for them to be that small and to be tortured, ridiculed, tormented, simply because they were the only Black children, the only Black family in the entire neighborhood. And to be forced by their parents to continuously endure this day after day because they're made to attend this school is always education, and they kind of disregard the snubbing. They're snubbed and they're overlooked, which was probably pure hell for them on the daily. It have to have had an impact somehow on these little minds. And I believe this is the root of what caused them to turn inwardly to one another from childhood into adulthood. Now, The Silent Twins is rated R. And if you would like to check out The Silent Twins, you most certainly can, because it is now streaming on Peacock. Let me know your thoughts on this movie and how you would rate it. If you have not already done so, be sure to subscribe. Dena Moviews and Reviews. And check out my other channel, Discussions with Dena, where I discuss current topics, events, and concerns to me and to you on YouTube. And you can listen on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or anywhere you get your podcasts. This has been Dena Movie Views. Join me for my next movie review and recommendation, and I want you to remember, it's my view. Now, what you watching?